Welcome to the Gritty Podcast. I am your host, Brian Call, and my guest today is Mark Livesey, Treeline Pursuits, Treeline Academy. We're going to talk about e-scouting today. We've been doing that for a couple weeks now, dropping little episodes on different subjects around e-scouting for elk. And today we are going to discuss
saddles, funnels, and travel corridors.
Okay, move that mic a little closer, and we're gonna hit that topic. And for those who haven't been paying attention, you can go to treelineacademy.net and you can learn more. Over there, you've got like 50 podcast episodes. On my page, you can find it on my YouTube channel. You'll find a playlist of all these podcasts that we've been doing over there, and it's good information, really good information. And if you want to get the course, if you hear more about it, you can use the code GRITTY over there and get a discount. And it's a 2-year
membership.
Two-year membership with the course. So you're going to have some time, and you need that time probably because there's so much information here. Quick testimonial. All the people that have taken this course, I have yet to find one who does not extol the virtues of the class. And so can't recommend it enough. And I think it will change if you want to, but you're going to get a lot out of just listening to the podcast as well. So,
I might start off too. I didn't mention this before, but I do want to encourage you guys. Seriously, if you listen to these podcasts or you go to the website, you read a little bit about it, you got any questions, you contact me through the site, guys. I mean, just straight up. Do you think this will apply to my situation? I'm hunting this state. I'm doing this rifle. I'm doing this.
Yeah.
I have guys write me, hey, I'm not doing elk yet, but I'm doing mule deer. Would a lot of this apply to mule deer? I'm like, absolutely. Now, maybe not all the elk finding features,
right,
but the glassing and the funnels and the train types and beetle kills. And I mean, there's so many things that could apply, and the technology, using the technology, setting up Google Earth for success.
Yeah.
All these things. I mean, is it, 100% applicable? No. But I get asked that a lot. Bears too, same thing. A lot of the things that, when we use a lot of bear examples, just because we're in the middle of doing a lot of the bear videos, and we just got off our bear hunt, which was just freaking fun. So I do want to open up the lines of communication. Don't hesitate. Ask me any questions. It's funny. I open myself up. Now, I'm not opening myself up to the whole crowd here. I'm just going to be honest about this, but I told my wife, I said, I need to step up a little. I said, I don't know how many people are going to take me up on this. I'm a little worried about it. I said, but I wrote all the people that are currently subscribed to the course. And I said, if you're having any trouble with your hunt planning and you got any questions or you want any advice, said, just email me. I'll do what I can.
Yeah.
Not that I'm an expert. I'm just saying, I'll do what I can.
Yeah.
Oh man, I was so overwhelmed. I mean, for like 2 days, I got so many questions, really good questions. Like, just, like, how do you tell if you're in the correct hunting unit? Where, like, the boundaries? How do you interpret the descriptions from the regs, and how do you trace them onto your national forest maps and that kind of thing? And when you're doing national forest maps versus all your hunt boundaries on OnX, and just things that I don't normally think about.
Yep.
That really great questions. Guys were like, hey, here's a lot of guys sent me their spots. I try to get people not to do that. Do not send me your hunting spots.
Yeah.
Because then when I end up there, you'll be like, oh, you stole my hunting spot. Because I've had guys do it. I've had guys twice send me spots, and they're like within a quarter mile where I hunt on some of my hunts. Yeah. I said, well, you're kind of in the right spot. If you see me there, don't get alarmed.
Yeah.
No, I'm just kidding. Cool. All right. So saddles, funnels, and travel corridors.
Yeah.
This is not a very long module in the course.
Okay.
It's kind of direct to the point. But there's some really key things that I think we could point out in this podcast that relate to a lot of others. Again, we're talking about elk finding features, and these are things that kind of go together with a lot of other features. They're not really that great standalone. Well, that's not true. Funnels are, and travel corridors are, but like saddles. Okay, I'm not necessarily looking for saddles as a standalone feature. Like, if I saw a really good looking saddle, I wouldn't be like going back to the back of a drainage to hunt this particular saddle. Unless it had some other supporting characters.
Yeah.
Benches are below it or whatever. So, as we go through that, as we work through this, kind of keep that in mind. So, Saddles and funnels particularly are important for late season hunters. Now, not that they don't apply for archery guys, I don't think, but I really get dialed into these more in the late season module, which is the very last module in the course. I really spend a lot of time on saddles and funnels as it relates to late season.
Yeah.
I don't think there's much better than a good saddle or a good funnel area for rifle season in a high pressure area. A lot of people say that. A lot of people talk about it, but they don't really tell you, well, that's great. You tell me that, but what ones are better? How do I know this one's better than this one? Mm-hmm. And so we spend a lot of time trying to break that down.
That's cool.
So we've talked about this before. Elk like the path of least resistance. No matter what you hear, elk like to live in steep territory. They're living in more steep territory probably than they ever have. Mainly, nobody knows for sure, but I'm guessing in relation to the wolves and predation and as far as hunting pressure, increasing, obviously they can live there, but when given the choice, they'll take the path of least resistance. And that's where all three of these come in, really. Saddles, funnels, and travel corridors, all related to this natural instinct to stay hidden, number one, stay close to cover, and take the path of least resistance. So when you combine those three, that's really kind of the impetus behind this module. Elk, they know when the pressure's on. I mean, they know. I mean, everybody's like, well, I'm going to try to get the first 5 days, before elk know they're being hunted. And there's some truth to that. But the reality is the time of year, the rut, it's clear to me, at least from my hunting, that they know something's up. They're making changes. They're just, even the first day of elk, if they forgot everything every year, which a lot of people try to make me believe, you would think the first elk bugle you blow, they'd come running right in. Well, they don't, even the first day of the season. So, I don't know how much they know and how much they don't know, but the fact of the matter is that they know when the pressure's on and they will respond to it. And that's where these kind of features, kind of come in.
Yeah.
So I like to mark these things. I like to identify these things. And again, this comes back to, what type of icon set you're using. I mentioned this in a couple of podcasts earlier, but it's important that you create a system of identifying features so that when you look at your maps, they're not all red default on X pins. It's really hard to look at that and make any judgment calls. So coming up with a color scheme, certain icons, certain numbers, certain shapes, whatever the options are, every hunt platform has a little bit different. But coming up with a plan so that you can do that, guys, will make your life so much easier when you're East County. Because, I look at 10 to 20 spots a year probably. And if I didn't have a system, when I went back, if I just was looking at a sea of red, it would take me forever to be clicking on, okay, what's that? Why did that? Now, obviously, sometimes you can look at it and make the call, but sometimes you want it, it's harder to pick out what those things, what the reason you marked them in the first place. So I can't stress enough how it is important to get kind of a system together, for your icon set.
Yeah.
So saddles. So we did this in benches. I think it's important that we spend at least a couple of seconds here talking about what a saddle is, just for people that are new and whatever. So a saddle is a dip in the terrain. I think of it as a connection between one geographical feature and another geographical feature, meaning along a ridge line, so to speak, there might be a dip in that ridge that connects the back side of the ridge to the front side of the ridge. And what that basically may mean is the elk may prefer to work through that saddle as they go from one feeding feature to a bedding feature, or from one pressured basin over to another basin. There's a lot of reasons that elk could be used, or they're looking for cows. They're on the hunt early September. They're trying to round up cows, and they're using these features, these saddles, to move between drainages or ridges or all kinds of things, and how they connect. So if you're looking down on a topographical map and you're looking at contours, it will start to look like a figure eight, kind of. It will be an hourglass type of shape, right?
Yep.
So it will get real narrow, and then we'll have a bulge on each end, and you'll see the contour lines kind of come down. Oh, there's a good example. And it kind of looks like I'm looking at some pictures here, like almost like 2 onion slices.
Yep.
You know, and maybe that's a better way of putting it, with one connection point between those onion slices.
Exactly.
And they can be one can be more exaggerated than another. You know, you can have my point is that you can have a higher elevation on one side of the saddle and a lower elevation on the other. They could be similar.
Kind of like the top one here.
Yeah, that's like we're looking at a couple
A little
of
diagram here.
Yeah. So
I'll put this into the video version of the podcast so people
good.
can take a look at that if they want to on this minute marker.
So we're trying to identify those. And so why are we identifying these? Well, for some of the reasons we just said, they're great travel corridors. Mm-hmm. But I like them for archery season for a couple of other reasons. Not so much for pressure for archery. I don't really hunt them that way too much for me. Mm-hmm. But what I really love is I love to find bench areas like we just talked about in the previous module. One of my favorite features, I always say favorite, because let's just say I really like this feature. When I can find bench locations that are 3/4 of the way up the slopes, they got the steepness below, above and below, like we talked about. Maybe they're a horizontal bench, maybe they're a staircase bench, all those things. But when I find that with a saddle directly above it, oh man, I know right there that those elk are super comfortable. They're on that bench. They know they've got an escape saddle right above them, or maybe not right above, but within close proximity. I really, really key in on those. I will always mark those for sure, and I will usually give them a prime indication. I use a feature called prime indication, which is a star. Any feature that I think is exceptional, no matter what feature it is, bench, saddle, if I think it's just exceptional looking, I'll drop a star. Why do I do that? Is because when I look at my map and I can see a spot over here has got 6 stars and this spot over here has 2 stars, it just makes sense to me right then. I'm like, okay, I got to look closer at this.
Yeah.
And you may not pick up on the 6 stars right off the bat, but the fact that you have that icon set for the stars, that's my personal way I do it. I know guys that use the 1, 2, and 3 in Gaia, like 1 is prime, 2 and 3. So I like to find these saddles that are directly or in close proximity to these bench areas. I also like to find saddles that are directly below or directly above or in proximity to ridge meadows or bench meadows where they're feeding areas. Especially late season, guys. This is especially late season. Not only will elk use a saddle for pressure reasons, but in the late season, they will move from the north side to the south side by temperature variations. It's warmer on the south. They're more windswept. They can get to the food better, but they'll bed on the north side sometimes still. So I find they'll just move through those saddles, not only because of pressure, but just because it allows access to food sources late season.
Yeah.
So in archery, I'm mainly looking for saddles because of in their relationship to the other elk finding features. Not, I said this earlier, but not because it's just a saddle. Okay. I usually need to see north facing slopes. I need to see benches in the air. I need to see the right drainages with no trails in the bottom. When I find these things with those saddles, I really want to key in on those saddle areas. I don't know if you want to add any more.
I agree. If you don't have those other features, the elk aren't there to use the saddle in the first place.
That's right. I don't know about that, but I don't focus on them as much.
Yeah. I mean, they might be traveling through that saddle a long distance, but the odds if you're targeting a saddle that's in an area with all these other features in it, they're likely to be there and then using it far more than a saddle out in the middle of nowhere without the other things to support the habitat, for the elk.
So a couple things about saddles I'll point out real quick is there's a lot of times there's trails going through saddles, okay? Because outfitters, packers, even hikers, they're no different than the animals. Elk. They're going to take the path of least resistance. So here's the way I look at it. When I see a saddle that does not have tree cover, meaning a lot of saddles are open because they're at such high elevations.
Yep.
They're either above tree line or they're right at the tree line. Now, not always, but if it's a non-timbered saddle, I will always go to Google Earth. Google Earth is the only way to do this. I say that a lot because it's got the highest zoom capability. You zoom into the maximum zoom on that saddle. And what are you looking for? You're looking for trails on that saddle. Are you seeing one trail? Are you seeing So here's the deal. If it's a hiking trail or a pack trail, a lot of times it'll be one single trail.
Mm-hmm.
They'll go up through the saddle. It'll come up the saddle and it'll go in. It won't come in at a contour.
Mm-hmm.
It'll be an up and over kind of thing.
Yeah.
But when you start to see coming in from the side or from the same contour and kind of coming in from both sides, and you'll see multiple finer, maybe not as distinguishable trails. When you start to see those, that's telling me could be cattle. So then I look at elevation. If it's really, really, really high, kind of right off cattle, and I'm like, those are game trails. Okay. You can see those things in aerial. You can't see them very well using hunt platforms like on X,
right.
Gaia. Got to use Google Earth, guys, to really I'll look at every saddle, zoom in. Now,
we do that across the board, though, not even for saddles, but I'll always double check because there's a lot of trails that aren't marked that are major trails you see once you look at it.
I look at every drainage. If I don't see a trail in the bottom, that doesn't mean there's not a trail, like you just said.
Yeah, I mean, if it just because it doesn't have a line through it it's not on a map, doesn't mean there's not a massive trail there.
That's right.
I see that often. Or your topo map says, here's your trail, but the real trail is
way over here.
Way over here down the hill. That happens to us a lot, too.
That happens a lot, too, yeah. So I tend to focus on those saddles that do not have established trails running through them, meaning on the map trails.
Yeah.
Okay, because obviously the people are going to really use those trails. When they're hiking, outfitters particularly are very heavy users of those saddle trails. So I tend not to get too dialed in on them if there's a trail. If there's not a trail, then I'll spend some time evaluating them. I'll look at the pressure. I'll see what I can kind of see from a standpoint of, can I see game trails or can I not? So one of the other things about saddles is I have found, so we talk about calling. Calling is becoming more difficult, I feel like, with elk hunting, because you said earlier, like, the gig is up. Like, they're figuring it out.
Mm-hmm.
I tend to believe that. I still love calling elk. It's my favorite thing. But I do a lot of blind calling now. I blind call in a lot of elk. A lot of guys don't have the patience for it. But I think those big bulls are very susceptible to blind calling early in the season, really early. Mm-hmm. Saddles that are timbered are prime calling locations. Those elk seem so comfortable coming up through a saddle if there's timber, like a timbered saddle. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I will set up in that saddle and call down to both sides and get on the right side with the wind, get on the correct side. So,
yeah,
I spend a lot of time, like, I'll mark timbered saddles for like midday. It's a great place. Like, if there's a bench below a saddle and you don't want to pressure the elk in that bench, but you think they're there, set up in that saddle above that bench and blind call them from that bench right up to it. A lot of times during the middle of the day, you can coax them right up to it.
Yeah.
So that's one of my tactics for cold calling.
Yep.
One of my favorite cold callers is this Paul Mandel. He elk nut. You guys, listening. I love that guy. But his cold calling setups and the way he talks, I think there's nobody better.
Yeah.
Than when it talks about cold calling and setting up the scenario in the elk's mind to try to set up a sequence that is realistic to the elk. So I wanted to throw that.
I've had a lot of success cold calling. That's kind of what my MO was in Oregon.
Yeah.
Because it's so dense and they're not talking.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so when you work a call for 45 minutes or an hour, it's almost as if they just couldn't help themselves. We called in a lot of elk. We killed a lot of elk that way. That's kind of how I used to do it. But the only issue I ran into was I didn't kill big bulls. We had younger critters that came in. And when I started to really want to kill something big,
I agree with that.
I had to kind of try a different strategy. So I think it's a great strategy. Just going to be a little harder to do it if you're out there. And guys that are targeting bigger animals at this point, they kind of already know that.
That's right. Well, so, these are some obvious things. But guys, if you're more limited, like physically, like maybe your conditioning is not where you want it to be and where you need it to be, and you're on the hunt and you're kind of getting worn down, guys, these saddles, start hanging out in them. Mm-hmm. Instead of hiking all over God's creation, hang out. Good things happen in saddles, guys. I mean, they just do.
It's for mule deer too.
Almost any critters, and just hanging out there, things can happen. Just hanging out on the slope in some random spot. is not as good, or you're, in my opinion, you're not increasing your odds as much as you are if you're hanging out in a good, high quality saddle area.
Yep.
So that's another reason I like to have those things marked. There's going to be days, guys, I hunt elk for a lot of days a year. I get worn down. There might be a day I want to take off. I don't want to hunt as hard. I need to recover. Instead of not doing anything, I'll spend a little effort. I'll get up to a saddle. I'll hang out all day. Just be there. Maybe I'll blind call a little. Maybe I'll glass. Maybe I'll, whatever the saddle's, presents itself as. So I wanted to put that out there. I had that down as one of my notes. So that's probably enough about saddles for now. There's quite a bit more about that in the course, how to identify them, how they relate to the other features. But just for the sake of this podcast, we'll kind of leave it at that.
Yeah.
So funnels, we talked about this, guys. Funnels, there's a lot of things that make up a funnel. And sometimes you have to be real obvious, sometimes they're not very obvious. You got to step back. We talked about this, backing up in Google Earth or whatever and looking at it from a mile high kind of view, kind of like I'm just trying to absorb the area and start thinking about how the animals might work around this area. If you've got a more open area, the more open it is, the more obvious the funnels and the connection points, they tend to jump out, guys. I've said this before, elk will take the path of least resistance, but they also don't like to be exposed unnecessarily. Mm-hmm. If timber patch A is connected somehow to timber patch B with some thin, they may not walk in it, but they might walk right beside it or right near it. Instead of crossing the wide open, they're more likely to take. So pay attention to those, especially guys, when you're looking in fire areas. I really focus on these funnel or pinch point areas in burns. Did I say burns or did I say something? I thought I said burns.
You said fires.
Okay, fire areas, burn areas. Where burn area is connected to another burn area. Like we were talking about this great spot in the burn areas that I like to hunt because it's all jumbly and it burnt real erratic. Yeah. I think one of the reasons it's so good is because of these funnels and pinch points. This live timber, timber that did not burn, that connects to other timber that did not burn through the burn. Guys, do not ignore those. Again, great cold calling locations. The elk are much more comfortable approaching that way, and they're more predictable. You can get in these pinch points or these and play the wind. They can't circle you. They can't circle you as easy.
To me, what I like about funnels, if you get the right one, is it might be cliffed out on the left side of the funnel, and the right side, maybe it's not cliffed out, but there's a river, or there's all sorts of things that make up a pinch point or a funnel. When animals are crossing from A to B, they're bedding to feeding or feeding to bedding. A lot of times to get to those places, they're choosing to go through these little pinches because those give them the easiest route in. And by the time you're in the rut in September, they're kind of more careless. They might be a little more cautious coming through a pinch like that on other occasions, and I just get so many opportunities on those. But the wind you can work so well because let's say you're right up against a cliff. That to me is a great pinch or a bench, right? Where it's super steep bench and a cliff because they want to walk right along the edge of that cliff.
Yeah.
And you can start to see it in Arizona. I use that terrain features like crazy hunting mule deer because I can almost predict this is where these deer are going to go and get there. And the wind, you get away with a lot on the wind, like it blows over the top of the animals. Sometimes when you're on a pinch looking over them, or like you said, they can't circle behind you.
Yeah, well, they're less likely to. Like in open country, I found that if you're calling them, they hug the edge.
Yeah.
They'll sneak right up that edge, and they're very, very they're more predictable. I don't want to say very predictable. They're just more predictable in those types of situations. So kind of to recap, so really any canopy clearing event. When I say canopy clearing, I mean like a burn, like a beetle, a logging. So, guys, the way they do logging operations, that they're starting to leave. There's less and less clear cuts nowadays, obviously. They're starting to leave these timber strips between these logs. Guys, they're money. They're just really money. And how they're traveling, how they're moving around. So when it comes to calling, when it comes to intercepting, when it comes to like you mentioned earlier, you were talking about these benches and you saw these elk coming from a long distance. They were kind of running and you just knew they were going to continue on their path and stay on that bench. Same with this. Same thing here applies to travel corridors. And these funnel areas is that it's just going to funnel them right. They're going to be more predictable there.
Yeah.
So
I think if you don't call and you can get into some of those spots with the wind in your favor, it's some of the best tactics, I think, for killing a big bull that's with a herd, that's coming to and from. Like in Colorado, we were finding that every other day a herd was taking either this pinch or that pinch, one saddle or the other saddle. And if you got there and you were offset a little bit, you could sneak over there as they were on their way back to their bedding area and get on them, paying attention to what the wind does and the shape of the terrain, and to get on those pinches. It's one of my main go-to strategies for hunting all animals. And when we're late season mule deer with lampers up in the mountains, he'll just be like, a giant is going to come over that saddle and is going to come through that saddle and that saddle. And we wait 4 or 5 days for the buck he wants to come through this. But every hour, there's a new buck coming over the saddle through the pinch as the weather comes in, pushes them down, and it's the same thing. They
get used to it. It's predictable to them, and when the pressure's not on them, they feel super comfortable in those environments. I just, it's funny. I was just looking at my notes here, and when I was on Rich Outdoors podcast, and Cody, one of his tactics, and this is a really great tactic that we talked about in this podcast. I had this in the course. He marks this is like e-scouting in the field. So as he goes along, and I do the same, but I've never thought of it like this. He marks all old rubs and all old wallows. He drops icons on waypoints for him as he's hunting. And in the course of a few days of doing that,
sees a pattern.
You see a pattern, and you'll see where those areas are connected.
Same with
and funnels in the corners, how those rub lines are connected. And so whitetails, same thing.
I was going to say,
whitetails are, and probably blacktails.
You start to see the same thing, and you're like, dude, they follow this bench line.
So sometimes it's hard to really say, is that enough of a pinch point, or is that enough of a funnel? And you start seeing things like this, and you're like, that's exactly what they're doing. I've got rubs over on this big patch of timber here, and I got rubs on this, and here's the connector between. They're obviously going between. So spend some time on that. Make sure you identify those. Spend some time on it.
Yep.
We talked about high pressure. We talked about saddles. We talked about late season. These are, saddles are. So what I also like to find is drainages. So one of my favorite drainages that I hunt, well, I shouldn't say favorite because I don't hunt a lot of places at the same time, but one of the ones that I've been to a couple of times, it's a north facing spoon drainage. And this drainage is so weird. It's got 3 saddles in it. It's got a saddle on the east slope, on the east ridge, the west ridge, and the very back of the basin. And they're prominent saddles. I mean, these are big dips.
Yeah.
And the freaking elk just pile in this drainage. And I think it's because they got 3 ways out.
Yeah.
And it just, when I saw it, I didn't really.
Especially late season.
Yeah, I didn't really put the value on that particular drainage as much. It had a few elk finding features that I could identify, but it wasn't overwhelming. But when I saw these saddles, I said, I'm going to go in there. I'm going to check this out. Man, it was like money. And now this was a rifle season, and maybe that's why they were in there. And, they could go almost any direction, and they could go over a saddle at a moment's notice. Yeah. So look for, not only is there a saddle present, but how does it relate to the other saddles? And look at how it connects, guys. Look at your main ridge. Look at your micro ridges. How do these connect? You got to start almost like visualizing, like, how the elk will, move around. I mean, it's not a science, but some visualization goes a long way here.
Right.
So, one of the last techniques I'll share with you that I like to do when it comes to saddles and stuff too is when I'm looking at a new hunt area and I'm trying to evaluate it and trying to think about how interested I am before I start dropping any pins, before I start digging in, before I start looking at anything other than maybe the north-south orientation, I will draw a line in Google Earth. I will draw a path. I will use the path tool. I'll draw a line up the drainage. I'll go up through the saddle, I'll just continuing this line up through the saddle. I'll drop down the other side. I'll go work through that drainage. I'll hit all the saddles over there. And then I will use the tour feature. So there's a feature in Google Earth that you can do the tour, but it's not designed for hunters, as Google Earth is not. So you have to change the settings. So here's the settings I use. I set it to 1,000 feet off the ground, and I set the camera angle to 60 degrees. Mm-hmm. So you're kind of looking ahead, and you're only 1,000 feet up. So you're not high, but you're not low. Mm-hmm. And I'll run that path. If you've never done it, I know it's hard to explain it on a podcast. And I just sit back in my chair, Brian. I try not to grab the mouse. I try not to do anything. I just want to watch. Mm-hmm. And I'll just watch as it flies along. I'll look at the timber. I'll see how sparse the timber kind of is. And it flies up through the saddle. I'll see how that saddle looks as I'm going through it, how I'm coming down the other side. I just can't tell you what historical knowledge you can gain by running these tours. They're called tours in Google Earth. Trace a path, and you say play tour. Oh, and the speed. You can control the speed. You can control the camera pitch. You can control the elevation. These are all in the preference settings in Google Earth. You go to preference and to tours, and you set all the tour preferences. Yeah. And then every time you run a tour, it'll keep those preferences. It's a great little tip. I mean, I wanted to throw that in there because I do that for a lot of other kind of features, but it particularly is great for travel corridors and saddles, flying through those saddles, just seeing how they look from a 3D perspective.
Right.
So
that's
anyway,
awesome,
I know that probably wasn't much, but on this one, so that probably wraps up most of our later on, we'll probably do a module on glassing in late season, but for archery seasons, that probably will wrap up most of our modules.
I do have some late season elk plans this year, so we should revisit the late season modules as we get closer to the season and kind of discuss some of that too.
Yeah, I'm not much of a late season hunter unless I got tags that are unfilled, but my son just turned 12 and he's kind of wild with his bow still and he can't pull enough weight yet.
Yeah.
So we'll be doing some rifle hunting, and so anyway, I'm going to do more e-scouting for late season than I typically do, but so it'll be his first year. Yeah,
I drew a mule deer tag, and I can get an over-the-counter elk tag, and so I'm just going to get them both, and then I'm going to try to fill both tags late in the year.
Sounds great.
I'm looking forward to that. And other than that, it's all archery pretty much, elk for most of the fall. And I don't have a really busy year this year.
Me neither. Last year I had 5 elk tags, and this year I've only got, right now I got 1 with the hopes of 2.
Ryan is stacked. Yeah, he has so many stuff. He has to give stuff away.
I know. I'm trying to get one of his tags. That's what I'm trying to get. Nice. In Idaho, you could transfer tags, and I'm still trying to figure that out. So I'm hoping to do that. We'll see. Well,
cool. I think we can wrap this up. I think we're good to go. Folks, check out Mark's class, treelineacademy.net. You can go check that out and use the code GRITTY. Get yourself a deal on the class. Can't recommend it enough. And
don't hesitate with any questions, guys. Seriously.
Yeah, hit them up. You're on Instagram at treeline_pursuits.
That's right, treeline_pursuits.
And, of course, there's links to all of this in the description field of our YouTube videos.
You know, I might add something else we have not talked about any of the segments is I've been doing these mini segments. I've done 5 of them now, where a little feature, like I told you about copying and pasting the latitude, longitude coordinates from from Gaia or Onyx and pasting them directly into Google Earth in order to fly to the spot quickly without dropping any points.
Yeah.
We talked about that. Like, you want to check this out in Google Earth real quick. A lot of guys won't do it because they got to find it. They got to, it takes time.
Yeah.
Well, this is a quick way to go right to where you're looking at on X.
Where
So it's on YouTube. On my YouTube channel, I have these, what I call mini segments.
Nice.
And I just did one on that. I did one on the new Onyx Radius tool, which is incredible. Brand new tool in Onyx. It's the radius feature.
Right on.
Draws a circle radius.
Oh, I do that manually.
Oh, so let's just real quick, saddles. And I just thought of it because I included this in this radius tool. So let's say you've got this saddle. Let's say it's late season. My son. Let's use my son. I'm taking my son. He's 12 years old. I know he's got an effective range of about 300 yards.
Going to be within that range of the saddle.
I want to know where can I sit in this saddle? Can he shoot 300 yards?
Yeah.
Draw a radius.
Figure out which way the wind's going.
Get your glassing spot. Put your radius tool. Do a 360 degree, 300 yard radius. That's his shot distance before we ever get there. I know. So
I need to start using that. Because a lot of times, too, I can plot an area, but I have to manually do the radius by drawing the line tool out in a star shape and then kind of connect it. And I go, okay, there's my radius.
That's right. So now
I've been doing that for a long time, actually.
Well, now you can do it. Well, in the course, I've always shown you how to do it in Google Earth and export it and bring it in real quick. But now they have a radius tool. And what's really nice about the radius tool is when you draw the radius, it creates, let's say you draw a 1,000-yard radius.
Yeah.
So it draws a 1,000-yard radius, and then it puts a 500-yard radius in automatically halfway.
Yeah.
So it's really, and you can turn it on and off.
Another person asked me about my inReach, and can you send your coordinates through your inReach, to your buddy so he can come to where you're at on, like, you're on X.
Yeah.
Let's say. And absolutely, you can type that in, and you can take the person's coordinates from the inReach that they send to you, or just how it plots it, and then you can just put it into your OnX and gives you a spot. However, we ran into this issue with a couple of buddies where their OnX wouldn't do it.
I know. It's because they don't have the right datum set.
Is that what it is?
So make sure when you guys go hunt.
It looked like it was the same format to me.
Was it?
I thought it was UTM or whatever.
Yeah, whatever. Use a decimal format. So use the lat long decimal or use UTM. Don't get into degrees.
Yeah.
Like it's really difficult to get 50 degrees, such and such minutes, such and such seconds.
Yep. You have to modify how you type it in.
That's right. Very difficult to do. You get messy with that.
You got the negative instead of the positive. You got rid of the east and the west and all that kind of
stuff.
UTM
is one of the easiest because it's a metric system. But
that's another. I need to go over that on the podcast.
That's a good idea. I'm glad you brought that up because you can do that. Now, most people know this already. But if you're using inReach and they are using inReach and you guys link and you guys put them in as a contact before your hunt, you can see them on the inReach.
You can.
So you can navigate, but it doesn't show you the terrain.
It depends, though. If you have an inReach Mini, it kind of sucks.
Have the screen. That's right. I didn't think about that.
It can sync to your phone. Yeah, that's right. But the topo is so bad.
I know, it's terrible.
So it's actually, when I have Ryan's location through a message, because when he sends me a message through the inReach.
I got killed another giant, come up here and pack it out.
Yeah, and I have his GPS location. I can take that and just type it into my OnX, and then we'll go right to him.
Or you can say, "Hey, Brian, I'm sorry I couldn't get it.
I can't find you. I don't know where you're at."
So you got to pack it out on your own. Yeah, so that's a good tip in the field. Doing that,
so they can find little tidbits like that on you're calling what now?
They're mini segments, and they're not no pay.
They're all free stuff.
Like, for example, this guy asked me a question about cattle. Like, how do I find out where the cattle are in my area? Well, I did a little mini segment on that. There's a quote app for that.
Yeah.
In Google Earth, you can download cattle allotments, just like timber, just like fires. Not people know about.
We talked about that in an earlier podcast.
Yeah, and so that's another mini segment I did. And
man, there's so much.
But I'm going to do more of those as time goes on. And these mini segments are really not my brainchild. They are questions that I've been getting that are more complex than the average.
Well, what's nice about it is I've done the thing where you answer one guy. And it's like now when people say, "Can you tell me how to can bear meat?" I just send them a link to the show I made.
Yeah.
Like any question they have, it's like generally I can quickly look it up on my YouTube channel and grab the podcast episode and send them a link. And that answers the question one time for everyone.
Thoroughly too. Like not half-ass answers.
Yep.
And
I wish Instagram would allow me to, in a message, post a link to a YouTube video because I have so much there. When people DM me, it's a lousy tool for putting in
links and stuff.
And
you can't even copy them either.
No.
So, well, thanks for having me, Brian. It was great being here in Salt Lake or near Salt Lake again. So, good to see you.
We need to have a llama podcast soon.
Yeah, we're gonna, and then
that's my new passion.
Start talking about next year's bear hunt. I guess
that's right.
Now that you guys have experienced llamas, I guess that's going to be a thing now.
Heck yeah! I've been. My eyes have been opened.
Yeah.
And now I've been enlightened. It's llama life for me. So cool, folks. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for supporting the show. Really appreciate all of that. Check out Treeline Academy and stay gritty.